This is Eric from the Eric and Mark Show, and today I would like to discuss a recent discovery that I had as I was talking to a martial artist. This conversation took that pivotal turn that conversations take when discussing martial arts. At any given point, for those of you that have had these kind of conversations, when it gets there, you can tell just how much or how little the person you're talking to respects you. We were talking about martial arts, and the person I was talking to is a black belt in Aikido, in a sword fighting martial art, and has recently taken on Jiu-Jitsu. My son was there as well. He is 14 and is a recent recipient of a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Before this conversation, I had been talking with my son about taking another self-defense style to strengthen other aspects of his strategy. During this conversation, the playground executive started to belittle the self-defense training that I have, Krav Maga, saying it is too violent and impractical and that my son should be like him and take Jiu-Jitsu. All this in front of my son. As he belittled my training and my advice and tried to establish his dominance over me, I couldn't help but think of the playground where bullies belittle those they deem to be competition in an attempt to shine as the most dominant on the playground. As he tried to subvert every postulation made by my son and I, what he was attempting to do became obvious. As my son tried to establish common ground, he said, "Wrestling, which I have taken, is similar to Jiu-Jitsu, isn't it?" To which the playground bully exclaimed in an attempt to belittle me and my son, "That is not true. Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling are polar opposites." I wanted to say, "Look, you ignorant you-know-what. Wrestling and Jiu-Jitsu both attempt to gain control of an opponent on the ground, making them have several similarities." You would have thought that my son was comparing snorkeling to horseback riding. Then this conversational bully said that Jiu-Jitsu is a better defense form than Krav Maga because Krav Maga is so violent, to which I was thinking, what's more violent? Getting your nose broken by a swift Krav Maga elbow, or having your shoulder dislocated and fingers broken by a Jiu-Jitsu move? They both sound violent to me. I don't know about you. But then the analogy started to present itself. This is not a slam on Jiu-Jitsu, but in the metaphor I saw extreme similarities between the gentle art of Jiu-Jitsu and certain aspects of playground bullying. Imagine a Jiu-Jitsu expert slowly choking out their victim, but because they aren't making any violent moves, nobody but the victim can tell, not even bystanders unless they know what they're looking for. In actuality, some of the worst forms of bullying are those that are only obvious to the victim experiencing it. Isn't that what happens to people in a work environment? The cliques at work wreak havoc on those not in the clique. But good luck proving that. Or star athletes on a sports team treating less important personnel subserviently.
Eric, so that's really interesting that you bring that up and what happened to you and your son. It's unfortunate. The thing is, there's several components there that I'd like to speak to. So from your standpoints, it's clearly evident that this person was trying to get some kind of leverage over you and your son, kind of putting themselves in the good light, right? And making it seem like maybe what you were doing was misguided or less important, or kind of like, maybe like, why are you doing that? That's a waste of your time. That's kind of what you took out of it. So it's kind of like there's two pieces to that, right? There's the executive's intent with understanding that he is the executive in this situation where he has the leverage. And then there's also your perception of his intent. Now, sometimes those two can coincide and sometimes maybe not. Maybe it wasn't entirely intentional from his standpoint. I'm not defending him. It's not entirely intentional from his standpoint, but his tone comes across that way, right? Because his tone is condescending. And I think it's very important to go ahead and speak to that piece. What was his intention is number one, which of course we can only speculate about. The perception that you have, which of course you can speak to, right? And then after that, we kind of think about, okay, well, what was the context kind of thing? Like who approached who, or who needed something from you, who initiated the conversation? So those are the kind of three things that first come to mind that really play as a factor specifically for what you experienced versus what somebody might have experienced, like in a personal scenario with a special interest group or in a workplace. So if you give us a few more details about the context, were you asking him about something, or did he start in with offering his unsolicited kind of like guidelines about what you're doing that's worthwhile and what isn't. Can you give us a little more background on that piece?
Absolutely. What kind of the dynamic we have in our conversation rapport is that he's the martial art expert and I'm not. And I guess, he may want to subvert the conversation because he wants to prove his superiority in front of my son, I don't know, to discredit me, to credit himself, maybe to bring more context to this scenario. Can you think of a time maybe in your personal life with a family member or a coworker or a friend or just somebody that you're interacting with in sports or whatever that has the need for some reason to ridicule you in front of other people to make themselves feel important to then take control of the conversation? Is there anything that you can think of on a personal note that you may have encountered where, it's almost like they have been commissioned to teach you a lesson. They've been commissioned to prove that you are full of it and they are here to set you straight. Is there anything that may resonate with that with you?
Yes, for sure. I've experienced that on many occasions where you have people who, no matter what you've done in your life, they either have done whatever you've done better, you know, uh, or they're telling you that what you're doing wrong. So if you've scored one goal in the championship game, they've scored two, right? If you went ahead and you bought yourself a nice car that costed you, whatever, 20,000, 20 or $25,000, and they have a better car than you do, right? Or if you're dating somebody who's good looking or whatever, then the one that they're dating is even better looking than who you have, according to them. So it's kind of like they're always going ahead and trying to one up you and making you feel like whatever you're doing is not up to par, which is a clear indication to me of somebody who's A, insecure, and B, also trying to act as the executive and or bully.
So is it worth trying to navigate that and try and find a common ground to reestablish some kind of peace and order? Or you think it's probably better to just cut ties with that person if they're not important to you and try and find a circle in which your opinion is valued?
That's a great question, and I think that it all depends. I think that, for example, we get that kind of thing even with family. Like, I have a relative who again, to the point of what I was saying, he's actually the cousin of my brother-in-law, and he that sounds kind of far removed, but actually, I get to see him at family events at least a few times a year and everything. And whenever I'm talking to him, he's got a new idea, or he's got an idea where if I'm telling him about something that I did, he's done it better, and he's I think seemingly kind of nice in his delivery. I wouldn't say he's rude or whatever, but somehow he always seems to be ending up doing better than me, no matter what we talk about. You know what I'm saying? Which is fine. It's kind of like more for me. It's kind of like I take it with a grain of salt to a certain degree. It's kind of like almost a humorous component. I see the comic relief in it. Where I'm going to see this guy and he's going to tell me again about how great he's doing and how he's doing better than me. To me, it's like more like because I'm very secure in who I am and what I'm doing. So when I come across this guy again, I don't take it entirely seriously. But here's the thing, though. I think that in his case, and I could be wrong. Again, it's a matter of perception. Like I said, to a degree. I don't think that his intent is necessarily to cut me down in that case as much as it is to prop himself up or make himself look good. Maybe he's a little bit insecure, and in his own right. I think that and why am I speaking about him specifically? He's the first person that came to mind, but also if you have somebody in your life who you really feel like, hey, this is a family member or this is somebody who you're going to have regular exposure to, it may be worth going ahead and saying, listen, can we check in real quick? I'm feeling a certain way about how our interaction is going. And I wanted to go ahead and put it out there and discuss it with you because I feel like this is what happens when we engage or, have an exchange, excuse me, on certain topics. Dry winter air over here. So what ends up happening is that if that person you feel like values your feelings enough and cares about you enough is either A, a family member, or B, just a person who's a part of your inner circle, to your point, then maybe it's worth broaching it with them. I think it's worth talking to them about it to kind of like set the record straight because they may not even realize that they're doing it. That may not be their intent. However, if the person is not that important in your life, maybe you're just part of a special interest group and you see them they're kind of like I used to tell you about the guys that and tell people in the show, hey, here's some guys who I play hockey with from time to time, but then especially with COVID and everything, I hadn't seen them in a few years. It's kind of like my life is no better, no worse than without them. You can kind of say, okay, you know what? I don't need to be around this person anymore. Like you said, have a different social circle of people that I can go ahead and interact with who will value my opinion more, who will value my experience more, and that kind of thing. Now, I don't want to make any assumptions, but it sounds like this guy might be the latter scenario where he may not really even really care about how you feel, or he may not even if he's not doing it intentionally, which sounds like he might be. He sounds like the kind of guy who might be like not really fazed by whether or not your son interacts with him or you interact with him. Am I getting kind of the right idea about who this guy is?
Yeah, very accurate. Yeah, I guess maybe because of the people he looks up to and maybe the issues they have with me, he kind of feeds into that and I guess tries to join the mission subvertly, to try and help push the agenda. Yeah, definitely.
Well, we talk about a show like Cobra Kai here from time to time, and of course, as anybody who's a fan of those shows, the show, or anybody who hasn't seen the show, just a fan of the Karate Kid series and that kind of thing, I like some of the references that come to mind. It used to be that with martial arts, right, and this is both, I'm talking about this in both a literal and a metaphorical sense, right, that martial arts used to be a form of self-defense. So if you're treating martial arts as a form of self-defense, like you in your case, your Krav Maga training, right? That you've had, which is a very important training, that is used in law enforcement, in the military, and that type of thing. And then you have your son's training, which is the wrestling, and he had just become, the black belt in Taekwondo. Those are very important types of training. Well, wrestling is more competitive, but especially the Taekwondo is very important. Is very important for self-defense. And maybe wrestling could be used as self-defense as well. I imagine that's true as well. Even judo is used as self-defense. And I'm not the martial arts expert here, but I do have a casual interest in it. So think about it this way: if the martial arts are treated as an art, to your point, like you said, the gentle art of jujitsu, or they're actually treated as something that, hey, this is something that we're being used that has either an aesthetic value or has a betterment of humanity value or self-defense value, then there's really no reason to go ahead and try to gain leverage over somebody else. I think that now what's ended up happening, and much praise to your son for getting the black belt and everything, that a lot of these martial arts have become not necessarily arts, but more a form of competition where somebody is getting some level of one-upsmanship on somebody else, right? Somebody's getting some leverage over somebody else. It's not like we're saying, hey, jujitsu, that's a nice form of self-defense. It's like, no, I know jujitsu, therefore I have an advantage over you. So what do you got, buddy, right? Those are two very different things. Maybe you can speak to that, the difference between self-defense versus being the aggressor and also treating martial arts for use with competitions.
Totally, yeah. The layer that I guess I would like to get into is, you and I, as the playground experts, totally know and understand what's going on here, the dynamics at play, and what the other party is trying to accomplish. But it seems like when you want to defend yourself, you kind of have to have the court of public opinion on your side. By that, I mean, you may have a relative saying, no, Mark, you're being unreasonable. He's just trying to communicate. You're the one finding issue with this, I guess kind of blaming the victim kind of thing. So kind of like in Cobra Kai, the example you brought up, there's a scene where Daniel's son is getting beat up by his counterpart because his wife basically takes that role of, you're just being too sensitive, you're taking this too seriously, you don't need to fight about everything, kind of turn the other cheek kind of thing. And so he ends up getting beat up for a large portion of the show. And there's that one scene in the dojo where the wife kind of gives him an eye contact and says, hey, I totally support you fighting this guy. And he proceeds to beat him up, to get the better of him. What can you speak to maybe about the victim having to justify their right to feel slighted.
Absolutely. And sometimes that happens discreetly, like we talked about with jujitsu, right? Where if anybody, and again, I'm not going to get into too many, as much as I'm inclined to, I'm not going to get into too many tangents here about martial arts history and everything. But when in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, we had the first several UFCs and the Gracie family, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu family, and you're seeing that a lot of damage is being done discreetly from the bottom, and the commentator saying, "Hey, that doesn't look like it's much damage," but the guy going ahead and kicking somebody in the hip or like where the kidneys would be and that kind of stuff. Even when he's in the bottom, the other guy has control on the top, right? He's in his guard. Then that's doing more damage than you realize. That's one of those things where it's really ends up being what's noticed by other people. Another metaphor is or analogy is the is what happens in hockey. That somebody can go ahead and do something really vicious to somebody else while they're skating down the ice, and the ref will only notice the retaliation. And then the guy who is the one who got harmed with the initial infraction, he's going on and complaining like, "Didn't you see what he did to me, ref? Didn't you see what he did to me?" It's like, "I sit down and cry, baby." Nobody saw it. It's all in your head, kind of thing. So we get a lot of that, unfortunately. We do get a lot of that. And that's why it's important that we develop tools to keep our composure, to notice that the initial infractions may either A, be very discreet, where they're kind of like more like gradual, kind of like the damage done by the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the guy in the bottom, right? Or they may go unnoticed altogether, like the initial infraction in hockey. And we have to notice that these guys are going to go ahead and they're going to try to sneak in the damage that they're doing. One of the worst bullies that I faced in high school, I would go ahead and when I gained some confidence, I'd lash back at him or push him back or say something to him, whatever. And he would like look around with this kind of like playing dumb look on his face, like, "What did I do? I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. Why is he getting so upset?" That was another way that he was getting leverage about it, because nobody noticed what he was doing to me. And then when I lashed back out at him, everybody's kind of like, "What's your problem, Mark? Like, come on, this is on the school bus." And these people who are doing this, not only are they going ahead and inflicting damage upon you when they're doing this kind of thing, right? And doing it discreetly, they're also going ahead and rallying people to their team. They're rallying people to their side to go ahead and show, "Hey, I don't know what his problem is. I'm doing what I need to be doing here, just minding my own business, and he's making this whole thing up. It's all in his head." That's actually another layer of the whole bullying process, if you ask me.
Definitely. And then another phrase that comes to mind from the Cobra Kai show is when I think Mr. Miyagi was explaining to Daniel, about conflict, and he basically said, he asked the question, "What's the best way to avoid getting hit?" And the famous remarks was, "Not be there."
Exactly. Yep.
So, there are certain times where we can avoid certain situations, like not show up to that family engagement because we know that this person is going to be there. It's going to be awkward, or not show up to a certain park because we know a certain person might be there. But what tricks have you found in your own life as far as when not being there is not an option? Like, let's say you have a bully at work, you have to go to work, you can't not go. What are some tips you may think of that we can, I guess, navigate in this scenario where we're being bullied, but in a way that only we can feel it?
That's a great question. And sometimes there are options and sometimes there just aren't many. Like, for example, this bully that was giving me a hard time on the school bus for a long time, he was continuing to do that while I was riding the school bus until I actually was got my driver's license, right? When I was 16 years old and I had my own car, then I started driving myself. But as long as I had to take the school bus and I have a ride because my parents were working and everything, I have a ride. He continued to do it. Now, when you're on the bus and you're getting bullied, the school bus is the one place, and it's a very important part of the playground, as we know. You really don't have anywhere to go when you're in a bus. You absolutely positively have nowhere to go unless you're moving to another seat where somebody else is or whatever. But the problem is our school bus, I could have moved away from it, maybe closer to where the bus driver was. But the thing is, our school bus was almost always packed. There's two people to a seat, and there's literally nobody to sit down next to. So when you found a seat, that was pretty much your seat for the whole ride, And I probably could have been smarter in some situations where I could have avoided confrontation. I was admittedly probably a little naive back then, but I don't think that I really had, looking back. I mean, it's been a while, of course. But I don't think that I really had too many options because he was always next to where I was or where my friends were and that kind of thing. Um, Sometimes though, speaking up in class, speaking up in meetings at work, you know, I get that sometimes too in companies that I've worked at or in school. If I went ahead and I wanted to participate in class, well, we have this thing in America, sometimes I don't know if it happens as much in other countries, but if you're going ahead and if you're participating in class, as much as the teacher's encouraging you to do it and asking questions and stuff, you're not that cool. It's not a cool thing to do. And I felt like I was getting like looks and this kind of stuff, or being made fun of, or made to feel awkward when I was trying to participate and ask questions. I'm like, well, this is what the teacher's wanting us to do. So I don't know about all these rules of being the cool guy, but I know that I'm participating and I want to get ahead and I'm curious and I'm engaged, especially in the subjects that I liked, especially history. And I would just as well go ahead and listen to what somebody else was saying in a history class. If they were offering something that'd be interesting to me too. So to me, it was really hard for me to wrap my mind around why am I being given such a hard time. Thankfully, when I got to college, though, they welcomed more participation, more people participated, so that was better. But in high school, junior high, places like that was terrible. In middle school, it was like nobody was participating except for me. And then when I was participating, I felt like everyone was staring me down. Same thing happens at the work meetings I'm referring to. Sometimes I'll go ahead and I'll feel like I'm being asked, well, why are you asking that question? What made you ask that? Why do you need to know that? I'm like, okay, well, forget it. Sorry that I asked. So sometimes what people will do to cope, they'll either go ahead and try to retain a low profile. They'll try to avoid the confrontation. They'll try to avoid the conflict, to go ahead and subvert it. Now, I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but I'm saying that is one way that people do it, especially when they're young and they don't have that much confidence or they're new at a company. There are other ways that I could probably think of too. What kind of ways do you have in mind? What could we do to go ahead and either divert a confrontation, or what's some more kind of like meaningful way, I guess you could say, where we can stand our ground?
Well, I guess the two questions that come to mind are, what are your objectives? Do you want to save face in the conversation? And it's something that you can kind of, make it a move that's empowering to you and the other people involved on your side, and kind of retreat in a way that, no one looks bad. Or do you need to find a way to mend the relationship because it's someone that you probably can't avoid seeing?
Yep.
Just curious, if you were a part of this conversation that was described in the intro, how would you have handled it if your intention was to walk away with your face held high, not necessarily concerned about salvaging the relationship?
Well, I might be the wrong guy to ask there because I have some ideas, but at the same time, the more recent version of me in recent years is extremely blunt in certain situations, and very direct and sometimes even confrontational. So what I'd probably go ahead, and if I felt like the guy in your situation was being condescending to me and or my son, I'd probably say, listen, I appreciate that you are have this experience and that kind of thing. Appreciate where you're coming from, and that that you have this knowledge, this know-how, and this exposure. But it would be nice if you go ahead and rather than going ahead and making us feel like you're cutting us down or whatever, why don't you just go ahead and offer some suggestions? It's kind of like I talked to you about the other day when you brought this situation up to me, that there's a way to go ahead and to make somebody feel like they're adding to their current arsenal rather than saying that what they're doing is not good enough. So, for example, case in point, if he had said something and presented it as, "Hey, that's pretty cool that you know Taekwondo, or that your father knows Krav Maga. Have you guys ever tried Jiu-Jitsu? That'd be a nice tool to add to your tool belt." That's a positive. That's saying, "Hey, listen, here's something that I've tried out, and I'm not saying it's any better or any worse than what you've done, but this might be something that you could add to your arsenal." And that way, everybody in the conversation feels good. What he's doing in his situation is pretty much like, "Hey, what you're doing is either misguided or it's a waste of time. Don't do that. Do what I'm telling you." And that already creates an imbalance. That already makes you guys feel awkward. feels uncomfortable. So to answer your question, I would probably go ahead and call him out on it to some degree. I'd say, listen, instead of going ahead and cutting people down about what they've done, what they haven't done, why don't you just make some suggestions? Why don't you go ahead and seek to empower somebody? In fact, I'll tell you that my last day at a company, I went ahead and this is years ago. Um, and there was a guy who I felt was constantly condescending. He had more technical knowledge than I did and that kind of thing. I was just beginning my career and everything. And the last day, it was probably, by most accounts, it wasn't the right thing to do. I came up to him and I said, I want to thank you for all the information you shared with me as I move on to my next endeavor. I'm like, I would strongly encourage you, rather than going ahead and cutting somebody down, empower them. Empower them using your knowledge and help to improve their knowledge. And that'd be a really good thing to do because you know a lot. There's a lot that people can learn from you, but your presentation is sometimes extremely condescending, and it made me feel uncomfortable. I worked here. Now, most people would probably say, "Well, that's nuts, man. Why are you going to go ahead and come up to him on your last day and say that?" Well, that's why I said it, because it was my last day. He kind of went ahead and kind of moved his eyes from side to side and kind of rolled his eyes and like he's like it's kind of sarcastic, like okay. So, but I could tell that he didn't like what I said. But again, I was very direct. I made myself heard, and I said it in front of a few other people. And I wasn't. I didn't feel like I was being. Maybe I was being a little confrontational. I wasn't intending to be disrespectful, but I went ahead and I held him accountable. I went ahead and I shined the light on him and saying, "Listen, you have power. You have an obligation to some degree to empower people with your knowledge, rather than go ahead and cut them down and make them feel bad about it. So I would encourage you to use that." I'd probably do something very similar in this situation. I'm extremely blunt and somewhat confrontational these days, and it'd probably be pretty direct what I had to say to him.
And what happened in the aftermath of that stance that you took?
Uh, well, I mean, it was my last day with the company, so I didn't. I don't think I ever talked to him again after that. So, I guess had I kept in touch with him to a degree, which I didn't, I would have known if he had changed his ways or that kind of thing. Or maybe somebody else could have told me, but I didn't keep in touch with anybody from that company. So what actually came out of that, I'm not sure. But at the same time, I had my moment to go ahead and kind of turn the tables on him. You know what I mean? So that felt good. I was able to go ahead and turn the tables on him. And I'm not encouraging anybody to quit their job tomorrow or whatever, but the fact that I was quitting that job, I was leaving that job, and I was able to go ahead and have a little bit of leverage, because if I stay there and I continue to report to him after saying something like that, our relationship may have not been very reciprocal or fruitful, let's say, right? Our working relationship. So I saved it for the last day, and I said what I had to say.
Do you think it'd be considered wisdom from playground experts to basically say, don't speak in a tone that may imply you're seeking advice unless you are certain the person you're speaking with respects you?
I like that idea a lot. I actually was thinking about that. I didn't phrase it quite that way in my mind, but I was thinking the same kind of thing in my mind. Is that you want to be selective about who you're asking and how you're asking them in the context of when you're asking them. There's a few factors. If you have an open kind of working relationship or personal relationship with somebody, truth of the matter is that's the best kind of a relationship where you can go ahead and you're approachable to them and they're approachable for you, and and you can speak freely, right? You can speak and you can ask questions freely because both of you are after the same objective. There's leverage, right? But if there's somebody who you're reporting to as a reporting manager, and it shouldn't be this way, but regretfully it probably is this way. There's somebody that you're reporting to as a reporting manager or whatever, and they have kind of a hot cold, I guess you could say, response to what your questions are, or your feedback, and that kind of thing. I would go ahead and not exercise caution, but maybe restraint or judgment, timing. Like, for example, one boss that I worked for years ago, he went ahead and I asked him a really good set of questions once and offered some really good feedback, and he completely lashed out on me. And then somebody came to me after the meeting and said, "Hey, listen, don't ever offer stuff like that in a morning meeting. He needs to have a couple of cups of coffee first." Well, clearly in that situation, we have an executive, right? Possibly even a bully. He has the leverage to go ahead and treat me however he wants because he's my boss until he's had X number of cups of coffee, right? Not fair whatsoever. At the same time, with me knowing that information, I can go ahead and bring up what I'm going to bring up. And next time I used a little bit of different approach, I tried to speak to him or give my feedback in an afternoon meeting instead of a morning meeting. Thinking that, well, hey, maybe by the morning he's already had his several cups of coffee or whatever. Again, just me not tiptoeing around him, but trying to be more, selective. And then I also felt like I did a better job of being kind of bullet pointing my feedback rather than going off on a longer monologue like I have a tendency to do probably like right now. I went ahead and I made it short, sweet, to the point. I think that works really well in professional environments, especially with bosses that have kind of a hot cold relationship with you in terms of your feedback or your questions or how approachable they are. I think that works really well. Same thing with people in life. I've had family members who've been very approachable, pretty much round the clock, and several family members that I can think of that it always depends on your timing of approaching them, how you're approaching them, what you're approaching them about, and unfortunately, you feel like you're walking on eggshells, but that's the kind of person that you're dealing with, and you just kind of adapt accordingly. And I've had to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
So think of a relationship you have where the respect is mutual. How would you say that relationship began? Like what made it to where you have mutual respect?
You have to build that. It's like sometimes it was hard for me to hear from my father. He talked about respect, and I said, well, you could respect me too, right? He's like, no, respect is earned. Now, I think that pretty much like with my daughter, I like to think that I'm going to give her respect out of the gate because I want her to feel good. I want to treat her well. I want her to feel good about herself, even though she's much younger than me. I want to do that. I want her to feel valued. I want her to have self-esteem. But certain people in certain families, they feel like, you have to earn respect. And I'm like, well, it's really hard for a kid to earn the respect of a parent. I mean, how many years does that take, right? And it's just, it's difficult. I think it's difficult. I'm not complaining about my situation, but it's just a difficult kind of burden to carry. I think that in a lot of situations, special interest groups, and work environments, unfortunately, it's just one of those things that you're not gonna nobody's gonna give you the respect until you earn it. Same thing I think I told you on one of these podcasts we had, one of our previous podcasts, where there was a guy when I joined the college hockey team. I scored my first goal and I said, hey guys, we had a tie game. I felt like we could have played a little bit better. He's like, pretty much like, you're nobody here. You got to earn your way into this. I'm like, well, I played well, and I thought, scoring my first goal kind of integrated me into the team. I made the tryout, right? It was what my thinking was, but apparently I hadn't done my time yet, so I didn't have his respect completely yet. So unfortunately, sometimes it's like that. If you're in a good, fruitful, reciprocal relationship, hopefully the respect will already be inherent or implied. In some other situations, special interest groups, especially competitive stuff in work environments, you're going to have to earn it in a lot of cases, unfortunately.
So in your experience, not to blame the victim, but definitely to try and own why this may be happening to people it's happening to. What are some alternate ways you can phrase when you have questions where you're in a scenario talking with alleged experts about any given topic in a way that, shows your respect for their opinion, but does not minimize the respect for your own opinion, if that makes sense?
Oh, so you're saying, I see. Okay, so you're talking about a kind of a reciprocal situation where they respect my opinion, where I show respect for their opinion, but they don't minimize my opinion. How do we gain that leverage, that balance? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because it seems like sometimes the way we phrase things, we're humble people, and sometimes people can misconstrue kindness for weakness kind of thing, as the old adage says. Maybe sometimes we phrase things in a way that may present themselves as us doubting ourselves. When we are merely respecting the company, the person we're talking to, and trying to give them benefit of the doubt and trying to respect them, and asking them for their opinion, but sometimes I fear maybe we are giving the impression that we're asking for their opinion because we don't have one of our own.
Oh, I see. So they're kind of maybe misconstruing our politeness or our kindness for weakness, right?
Yeah, so they think we're asking because we don't have an idea of our own or a concept of our own or a logic system of our own. We're asking kind of as if we're idiots. And then that's why they may get upset when we have something to say as a retort because maybe they're confused. Maybe they thought we were asking because we didn't know when we were just asking because we value their opinion, even though they don't value ours.
So yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean, I think that in a lot of those situations, especially with the way that I was raised, it was like to always, oh, don't impose on people, always be polite and that kind of thing. Never hurt anybody's feelings. So I almost felt like I had to qualify what I was saying, right? A question that I was asking, or maybe make an introduction to why I was bringing something up, or try to offer my opinion in the most gentle way possible. Regretfully, we realize that in life, there's places to be kind and gentle and discreet and exercise self-restraint, and there's places where it pays to be more aggressive. I think it's hard to dispute that. And I try to find a common balance between both. I try to not be too aggressive, but I'm pretty direct, as most of you have probably figured out. And what ends up happening is that for me, it's important to know what I'm saying going into those situations with those people who don't I don't necessarily have the respect, or if I do, it's kind of like a hot cold kind of thing. So again, like I said, I think it's important to be direct and to the point with those people, and also to be very selective when I'm offering input or feedback. And I feel that served me well in my professional life, but personal life as well. Whereas before, I used to always just say what I thought about everything, and just kind of like, hey, can't we all just get along, and just offer everybody offers what they think. I realize in a lot of situations, unfortunately, that doesn't work, and people do make mistake kindness for weakness, or being too polite, or saying, people are like, hey, Mark, just spit it out, just say what you have to say already, okay, and enough beating around the bush or whatever. In this situation, I've just learned to just go ahead and go, and in a lot of cases, I just try to go directly for what I'm trying to ask, or what I'm trying to express as feedback. But I do some prep work. It's very, very important to know at that time what you're about to say uh, in those situations where people are going to be judging you harshly. For example, we've had debates recently, right? Different spectrums, political spectrums, otherwise. You see that people can go ahead and get caught very off guard in a debate because they don't know they haven't had a chance to prepare for the questions, or somebody within the debate who they were debating with challenged them. I think it's really, really important to stay confident. Try to do your best to believe in yourself. Also, remind yourself your opinion matters. Just because somebody is an executive and you are, one of the subservient members of the team, be that in the work or the sports team or whatever, just because the guy's the big goal scorer and and you're the role player, does not mean that your opinion counts for less than theirs. In fact, what happens in countries, forgive me the tangent I'm going off on, but why is Japan, a country like Japan, for so many years, produced some of the best quality products in the world? And people want to buy made in Japan, because rather than you having these executives going ahead and telling the little guy or the worker bees what to do, it's actually the worker that comes, who's on the front line, who has the most exposure, who knows the subject, and he's telling the executives what's going to make the best product, right? He or she. So the thing is that this whole thing that we have, I don't know if it's the Western part of civilization or how to speak to that, where just because somebody's an executive, they have a right to go ahead and squash what the little guy thinks. You see that turns out poor morale, that turns out poor products in a lot of cases, and high personnel turnover. And, again, I realize that what I'm saying is somewhat of a tangent here, but I think it's important to keep that in mind, to remind ourselves that no matter whether we're the executive by title or in the situation of the company, or we're reporting to somebody on some level, we're forced to be submissive, or we're the intern coming in, right? or whoever it might be at whatever organizational hierarchy, we have to remind ourselves that what we are as a human being, what we are as a professional, that matters. That absolutely positively matters. And when I remind myself regularly that what I have to say matters, my opinion is no less important than anybody else's. My questions are no less valid than anybody else's. That makes me feel better. That makes me feel more confident. And then I come in with a little bit of self-restraint, right, and try to hit the main bullet points, and then I think I do better in those situations. It's hard to get there. It took me years to get there, and I still struggle with it every once in a while. But I think it's important to keep those things in mind. Be confident. Remember that what you say matters. Everything that you say matters, and everything you ask matters. And nobody is more important than you. There's not. We're all human beings. We're all in this together. And I think it's important to keep those things in mind and value yourself. But at the same time, take into consideration the personalities you're dealing with, the timing. Has the executive had his few cups of coffee? Again, you don't have to tiptoe around the executive, but at the same time, you're probably going to get a better response if you wait for him to have his few cups of coffee, like in my case, or approach him in the afternoon, but with the same question that you had in the morning. Those are just things to go ahead and get a little bit less backlash, I would say. Again, try to be as much to the point as possible, not too long-winded like your friend Mark here, and be confident. Be confident, be direct, stand your ground, but be polite at the same time and be respectful.
Awesome. Those were awesome closing remarks. Not to be redundant, but another go at closing remarks. I just had a thought to bring the martial arts metaphor full circle. It seems like on one note, it may not be advisable to bring boxing gloves to a jiu-jitsu match. In other words, because people watching this are going to see only one aggressor. They're not going to see the underhanded blows and kidney punches that are being delivered to you by the jiu-jitsu guy, but they're going to see your swings at the guy's face. So would you think that maybe on one note it's not advisable to bring boxing gloves to the jiu-jitsu match, or would you say that we're better served in this metaphor to go ahead and try and master several martial arts? Or should we stick to our art?
I like that question. And what ends up happening is I think that we're better off having whatever arsenal we can, whatever tools we can add to our tool belt. And that works professionally and that works personally. You know what I'm saying? Like pretty much in everything, like whatever diet somebody's doing, it involves a combination of certain foods or whatever exercise program somebody's doing. It's not just one type of thing, right? It's usually the most effective stuff is multifaceted. So I always feel it's good to come in with an arsenal. Anybody who's a working professional, anybody who's in the military, right? Anybody who's in the field of like law enforcement, they know how to be tough and they know how to be assertive, but at the same time, they know how to want to be, more reserved and observe more and listen more and also to be gracious, right? And so I think that whatever ways we can add to our arsenal, I think that we do that. In the meantime, yeah, I think it's important to be cognizant, aware of the context. Not necessarily don't bring boxing gloves to jiu-jitsu match, but at the same time realize that, hey, your opponent is trying to go ahead, like in the case of Royce Gracie, in that first Ultimate Fighting Championship, he's trying to go ahead and he's trying to have a ground game. He's trying to bring the game to the mats, right? And have his kind of game that where he wants to be on his back and he wants to go ahead and take control of the match using his own context, his own terms, his own training. If it does go to the ground, it goes to the mats, then be ready to go ahead and realize that you're in his guard and that you're going to go ahead and have to play by those rules to a certain degree. So it's good to have, for that reason, multiple tools in the arsenal. At the same time, remember, with the Ultimate Fighting metaphor, if you go ahead and you break out of his guard and you get back up to your feet, well, guess what? It's a boxing match again. So not to say that you can't I wouldn't say that you can't bring the boxing gloves to the jiu-jitsu match, but at the same time, I will say, while it's on the ground, you better be ready for it to be a jiu-jitsu match. And if you have an opportunity to get back up on your feet, which hopefully you will, then that's when you can go ahead and use your boxing gloves to full effect. And that's where you have the advantage over the jiu-jitsu guy.
Definitely. So maybe, I guess, to bring conclusion to this episode, I'm reminded of the words of a martial art expert. I forget what martial art he practiced, but he basically said, the way to identify a sham dojo is two-pronged. Any dojo that says that they are the only martial art you need is lost. And any dojo that proclaims that they're the best is also lost. So maybe we're better served by only going and blessing those dojos with our presence where they respect all martial arts.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I couldn't have said it better myself. They respect all martial arts, but in the context of martial arts, the purest of martial arts, what do? They respect all forms, not only all forms of martial arts, they respect all forms of people. If I'm a martial artist, right, from let's say from Taiwan versus a martial artist from South Africa, right, or martial artist from Brazil, or martial artist from Los Angeles, right? I don't have any less worth than any of the other guys. I'm in it with them. Now we go ahead and we try to enhance and move along as professionals and that kind of thing. But I think the underlying message of what I'm trying to say here, and I like the points that you're making, is that everybody has their own arsenal they bring to the table of things they offer on a professional level, on a personal level, to competitive environments and that kind of thing. Everybody is important. And I think that the conditioning that we've had in society, and I like how one of our listeners, she said that to me the other day. She said, you know what, I realized after listening to your show, society's been conditioning us a lot that we have to be submissive, or that we have to think about things in a certain way, or that we should be quiet when we're getting bullied or whatever. Remember that our lives, okay, at the end of the day, are no more important or less important than anybody else's. Society conditions us to believe, oh, hey, well, this person, because he's president of this organization, he's more important than you are. Well, maybe for that company, he might be harder to replace or whatever. But your life, your opinion, your value as a person, your confidence is not even a drop less important than what he is or she is. You're a person just like they are. Your life has its own purpose, its own existence. For those of you who believe in that, you're created by the universe, created by God, for whoever believes in that. And even if for the people who don't believe in that, you're created in the same context as everyone else was, right? So whatever it is, I'd love to see society turn around this idea that somebody's life is more important than somebody else, or somebody's a more important person than you are. It's not true. It's a fallacy. It's rubbish. And all it does is that understanding leads itself to people acting as bullies and executives to others and disempowering them and trying to gain an artificial advantage over them. And that's what I really hope that our society in time will be kind of like a new awakening, a new way to view things, where we realize that that everybody matters, and everybody has value, and there's no competition or workplace that can tell us otherwise.
Definitely, yes. I guess probably the advice I would have to end this episode on my end would be that conversation I had at work today with somebody who is a PhD candidate. That's very commendable. I think the Eric and Mark show can stand behind anybody trying to improve themselves. So whether you have a PhD or a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu or black belt in Krav Maga or Capoeira or Kempo, and you come to us and you display that and you're proud of it, we're proud with you. But if you ever try and display that as a means to say you are more valuable than we are, you need to be, we have to cut the line and set you back to sea.
That's exactly right. The person who's doing the volunteer work for the people in a country like in Asia or Africa is no less important than the presidents of a big corporation in America. Everybody's input counts. And that's right. If anybody thinks that they're more important than somebody else, or that their arsenal matters more than somebody else's does, then, like you said, send them back to sea. Send them back to the beginning, because they've got a lot to learn in this life. And I think that the collective conscience, the collective awakening, would be to understand that again, we're all in this together. Not to sound like too much of a tree hugger here or anything. Maybe I am to some degree, but at the same time, everything that everybody does, every level of the team, every level of the organization matters, down to the very last role player on the team that you play on, even in professional sports teams. And once we start accepting those roles and relishing them and understanding that they're no less important than somebody else's role, then we'll all do just fine. Everybody will feel really good about their contribution. Morale will be higher. We'll all feel really good about showing up. And that's where I idealistically hope that everything goes in time.
Definitely. And just a disclaimer once again, this is not a bash on any martial art. any true practitioners out there, we respect you. All others who don't have the right idea, we don't respect you. Please leave your comments below, questions below. It's very important that you guys get involved. Hopefully we struck a nerve, and we will see you next time.
Please like, subscribe, and thank you for listening to us. Thank you, Eric, as always, with your wonderful thoughts and insights and questions, thought-provoking questions. We all have a lot to think about. We've got a lot to work, so we can get under the hood and put our work clothes on and get to work on making our world a better place, and a better place, especially for our loved ones. So we'll talk to you soon. Take care.